The December wind howled like a wounded animal as Margaret Williams, Maggie to the few who still remembered her name, sat in her decade-old sedan, watching snowflakes dance in the harsh glow of the supermarket parking lot lights. The fuel gauge hovered just above empty, a warning light that had been her constant companion for days now. In the back seat, 7-year-old Noah slept curled around Rusty, their aging golden retriever whose graying muzzle twitched with dreams of better days. Maggie's fingers trembled as she counted the money one more time. $23 in her wallet, a bank account overdrawn by $176, and the final paycheck from the grocery store that had fired her last week. Barely enough to cover half of last month's rent. Have you ever had to choose between filling your gas tank or buying food? Leave a comment if you face similar difficult choices in your life. Rusty whined softly, as if sensing her distress. The dog had been Daniel's parting gift, perhaps the only decent thing her ex-husband had done before walking out 5 years ago, leaving her with a mountain of credit card debt and a toddler who still asked when Daddy was coming home. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, reaching back to scratch behind his ears. "We'll figure something out. We always do." The library would open at 9 tomorrow. They could use the free Wi-Fi to search for jobs, and Noah could read books in the warmth while she applied for anything and everything. 5 years of serving tables, cleaning houses, filing paperwork at offices that didn't ask too many questions about her spotty resume, each job lasting until Noah got sick or a snowstorm closed schools, and managers ran out of patience for a single mother with no backup plan. Noah stirred in his sleep, his breath catching with the familiar wheeze that tightened Maggie's chest. His asthma medication cost more than she made in 2 days, but skipping it wasn't an option. Beside him, Rusty shifted his arthritic limbs, always positioning himself where he could feel Noah's breathing, as if the old dog had appointed himself guardian of the boy's fragile lungs. 2 weeks they'd been living in the car now, ever since the landlord had changed the locks after months of partial payments and broken promises. 2 weeks of washing in gas station bathrooms, of pretending this was just a grand adventure when Noah asked when they were going home. The Seabrook Public Library smelled of old books and fresh coffee, a haven from the biting cold. While Noah explored the children's section with Rusty patiently at his side, the librarian had taken one look at the boy's pale face and decided the no pets rule could be bent just this once. Maggie scrolled through job listings that all seemed to require experience she didn't have, or availability she couldn't promise. That's when she saw it, a wrinkled flyer pinned to the community board beside advertisements for yoga classes and lost cats. "County tax auction," proclaimed bold black letters. "Abandoned properties. Minimum bid starting at $50. Her eyes skimmed the list of addresses, each with a grainy black and white photograph showing buildings in various states of disrepair. The first 4 were in neighborhoods she recognized from driving through, places where even dilapidated houses would sell for thousands to investors looking to flip them. But the 5th property, at the bottom of the page with a minimum bid of $175, was different. The photograph showed a 3-story Victorian mansion perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, its widow's walk tilted at a dangerous angle. Its wraparound porch sagged toward the sand below. 17 Lighthouse Road, read the caption. Storm damaged. Buyer responsible for all repairs and back taxes. 412. Sold as is. No exceptions. Maggie's heart hammered in her chest. $175 for the bid. $412 for back taxes. $587 in total for a house. A real house with walls and a roof and an address where Noah could go to school. It seemed impossible, miraculous, probably too good to be true. But when she called the county assessor's office, pretending to be a potential investor, just doing research, the clerk confirmed the details. The Victorian had been abandoned for decades, assessed at almost no value due to structural concerns and erosion of the cliff face. $587 would indeed buy her a house, if she could gather that much money in 4 days. That night, parked behind the library where the security guard pretended not to see them, Maggie explained her plan to Noah. What if we could have our very own house, she asked, watching his face in the dim glow of the dome light. A big house by the ocean, where you could have your own room and we'd never have to sleep in the car again? His eyes widened, skepticism battling hope across his small features. Is it magic? He whispered. She kissed his forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair. Maybe it is, she said. The kind that requires you to believe in something even when all evidence suggests you shouldn't. For the next 4 days, Maggie did everything she could think of to earn money. She sold her wedding ring at a pawn shop, the gold band Daniel had placed on her finger 9 years ago, back when she had believed in forever, and got $65 that felt like both freedom and failure. She collected bottles and cans from park trash bins, earning $42. She stood on a street corner with a cardboard sign until a police officer moved her along, but not before kind strangers had dropped $78 in her coffee can. Linda at the supermarket deli, who had always slipped Noah an extra cookie when they shopped there, contributed $50 when Maggie explained her plan. You're either the bravest or the craziest woman I've ever met, Linda said, pressing the bills into her hand. Either way, I want to see how this story ends. By Friday evening, Maggie had scraped together exactly $592, enough for the bid and the back taxes, with $5 left over. She counted the money repeatedly, the bills growing soft in her hands, hardly daring to believe this impossible plan might work. The auction took place in the basement of the municipal building, a fluorescent-lit room with folding chairs arranged in rows facing a podium. Maggie arrived 30 minutes early, Noah's hand clutched in hers, both wearing the cleanest clothes they had, which wasn't saying much after 2 weeks of washing in public restrooms. The other bidders were clearly professionals, contractors with clipboards, investors in expensive suits murmuring into cell phones. Maggie felt the familiar weight of being out of place settle over her shoulders, the sense that she didn't belong here with her thrift store clothes and her son and her desperation showing on her face. She registered at a table near the entrance, her hands trembling as she showed the cashier's check she had purchased that morning with her $592. The woman explained the rules mechanically. Each property would be announced. Bidding would continue until no one raised their paddle. Payment due immediately, all sales final. The first 4 properties went quickly, paddles shooting up around the room as people competed, prices climbing into the thousands. Maggie watched the casual way these people threw around money that represented more than she made in months, her hope crumbling with each bang of the gavel. By the time the auctioneer reached the 5th property, she had to grip her paddle with both hands to keep it steady. He held up the photograph, that same grainy image of the broken house standing alone against the sky. 3-story Victorian, he said in a monotone voice. Storm damage, structurally unsound, no utilities, extensive water damage, mold, foundation issues, sitting on a cliff with serious erosion concerns. Buyer assumes all responsibility for repairs or demolition. Minimum bid $175. He paused, looking around the room with an expression that suggested he didn't expect anyone to bid at all, and asked if anyone wanted to open at $175. Maggie raised her paddle, her arm feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The auctioneer looked at her with mild surprise, nodded, and asked if anyone wanted to go to $200. The room remained silent. He asked again. Then from the back of the room, a voice called out, 200. Maggie turned to see a man in an expensive suit standing near the wall, his expression calculating as he studied her. The auctioneer acknowledged the bid and asked for 225. 225, Maggie countered, her voice cracking, her mind racing through calculations. She could go up to $400 at most, after saving enough for the back taxes. 300, the man said immediately, a small smile playing at his lips. 350, Maggie called out, knowing she was cutting into the money needed for taxes but unable to stop herself. 400, he countered, clearly playing with her, probably wondering why someone who looked like her cared so much about a worthless property. The auctioneer looked at Maggie expectantly. She couldn't bid higher. Everything she had would barely cover $400 plus the taxes. The dream was slipping away before she had even touched it. And then a different voice spoke from the middle of the room. An elderly woman with silver hair and a weathered face, who had been sitting quietly through the auction. "That's enough, Edward," she said, her tone sharp. "Let her have it." The man, Edward apparently, looked at the woman with something like respect mixed with annoyance. "You sure about that, Eleanor?" he asked. She nodded firmly. "I'm sure." Edward shrugged, lowered his hand, and said, "No more bids from me." 400 going once, the auctioneer continued. Going twice. Sold to bidder number 14 for $400. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like thunder in Maggie's ears. She had won. The house was hers. Noah jumped up and down beside her, not fully understanding what had happened, but sensing his mother's emotion. As Maggie approached the payment table, the older woman, Eleanor, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That property belonged to a friend of mine," she said quietly. "She would have wanted someone like you to have it, someone who needs it." Maggie tried to thank her, but couldn't form words past the lump in her throat. Eleanor smiled sadly and walked away, leaving Maggie to face the practical reality of what she had just done. The road to 17 Lighthouse Road wound through twisted trees, bent sideways by decades of ocean wind. It ended at a sandy turnaround where a rusted mailbox leaned at a precarious angle, the numbers barely visible through corrosion. Beyond the mailbox, a path of broken pavers led toward the cliff edge, where the house stood like a sentinel against the gray December sky, or maybe like a tombstone marking something that had once been grand. Maggie parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at what she had bought, what she had gambled everything on, and felt cold doubt wash over her. The photograph hadn't conveyed how ruined the place actually was. The roof sagged in multiple places, missing shingles creating gaps through which she could see sky. The porch had collapsed entirely on one side, boards rotted through and hanging at crazy angles. Windows were broken or missing, their frames empty and dark. The whole structure tilted slightly toward the ocean, and the cliff edge was visibly crumbling where waves crashed against rocks below. Noah got out of the car and ran toward the house, his enthusiasm undampened by the obvious problems, calling back about how big it was, how many rooms they would have, how cool it was that they could see the ocean. Maggie followed more slowly, carrying the folder of documents and the single key, testing each board on the front steps before putting her full weight on it. The front door hung crooked in its frame, swollen from moisture and salt air. The key wouldn't turn in the rusted lock, so she simply pushed, and the door swung inward with a groan that sounded almost alive. The interior was worse than the exterior. The entryway opened into a grand foyer with a sweeping staircase, but the stairs were missing several steps, and the banister had pulled away from the wall. Water damage stained the walls in abstract patterns of brown, black, and green mold. The floorboards were warped and buckled, some rotted through completely. There was no electricity, no running water, no heat. The afternoon sun slanted through broken windows, creating bars of light in the dusty air, and Maggie stood in that ruined foyer, wondering what foolish desperation had convinced her this could work. Noah appeared at her elbow, looking up at her with complete trust, and asked which room would be his. Maggie felt something harden inside her, some core of determination refusing to break even when everything around her was broken. She smiled at him, forced brightness into her voice, and said he could pick any room he wanted on the second floor once they'd checked that the floors were safe. That first night, they slept in the car one last time, parked in front of the house that was legally theirs but not yet livable. Maggie had spent the remaining daylight hours exploring the property, making lists in a notebook, prioritizing problems into categories of urgent, important, and impossible. The next day, they walked to the property line, where Maggie had noticed a half-collapsed shed. Inside, she found remnants of tools, a hammer with a cracked handle, a rusty handsaw, a box of assorted nails and screws, a crowbar, and several lengths of warped but usable wood. They spent Sunday covering broken windows with pieces of plywood cut from shed boards, Noah holding wood in place while his mother hammered nails with unpracticed strokes. They dragged fallen tree branches away from the entrance and used the crowbar to pry off the most dangerous parts of the collapsed porch. By sunset, they had made the front parlor secure enough to sleep inside, with a brick fireplace for heat and light. They spread their blankets on the warped floorboards, lit candles Maggie had kept in the car for emergencies, and made a small fire with driftwood collected from the beach below. The fireplace worked, drawing smoke up and out, filling the room with flickering warmth that pushed back the December chill. They ate sandwiches made from the last bread and peanut butter, rationing what little food remained. Noah curled up against his mother's side. Rusty stretched out protectively alongside him and said this was like camping, like an adventure. Maggie held her son close and agreed it was an adventure, the biggest one they had ever been on, trying not to think about how they had no money left, little food, and no plan beyond surviving one day at a time. Monday morning, Maggie walked into town, 3 miles each way along the coastal road, leaving Noah with strict instructions not to go near the cliff edge or the upper floors. The town of Seabrook had a population of maybe 2,000 people, most involved in fishing or the seasonal tourist trade that dried up after summer. Maggie went into every open business, the diner, hardware store, gas station, marine supply shop, asking if they needed help. The answer was always no, sometimes with sympathy, more often with indifference, along with the suggestion to try again in spring when tourist season started. At a small grocery store on Main Street, she met Linda Carson, who took one look at Maggie's desperate expression and offered something different. "I can't give you a regular job, but I can pay you cash under the table for odd work, stocking shelves, cleaning, filling in when someone calls out sick. It's not much and it's not guaranteed, but it's something." Maggie accepted gratefully, and Linda put her to work immediately. 3 hours of unpacking boxes and organizing the stockroom for $45. Linda also sent her home with a bag of day-old bread, bruised fruit, and dented cans from the discount rack. Food the store couldn't sell, but was perfectly good. On her walk home, Maggie encountered Eleanor Reed, the woman who had helped her at the auction. Eleanor's weathered face crinkled into a smile of recognition. "How are you settling in?" she asked, as if Maggie had moved into a normal house under normal circumstances. "We're making it work," Maggie replied, not wanting to seem ungrateful by mentioning the overwhelming challenges. Eleanor nodded approvingly. "That house belonged to a dear friend of mine," she said. "I've lived in Seabrook all my life, over 80 years now. I know every story this town has to tell." "Why did you help me at the auction?" Maggie asked. "You don't know me?" "Catherine would have wanted someone like you to have it," Eleanor said simply. "Someone who truly needs it. Not Edward Blackwood looking to tear it down for another vacation home. Nobody lives in 9 months of the year." When Maggie asked more about the house's history, Eleanor seemed hesitant. "I'll come by tomorrow," she promised. "There are things you should know." While Maggie worked in town, Noah explored the mansion with the fearless curiosity of childhood. He claimed a bedroom on the second floor, one of the smaller rooms where the floor felt solid and the windows still had glass. Rusty followed him everywhere, the old dog seeming to regain some youthful energy as he inspected every corner of their new territory. Noah swept out dust and dead leaves, arranging his few possessions with care. The stuffed rabbit he'd had since infancy, 3 toy cars, a book of dinosaur facts, and the family photo taken before his father left. Back when they had been a normal family in a normal house. It was while examining the walls of his room, tracing patterns in the faded wallpaper, that Noah noticed a section near the closet where the plaster bulged outward strangely. He pressed on it experimentally, and the plaster crumbled, revealing a hollow space behind. Excited, he ran downstairs to get his mother, pulling her by the hand and chattering about a secret hiding place. Maggie followed, expecting to find evidence of water damage or rodents, more problems for her growing list. But when Noah showed her the hole and she peered into the darkness, she saw something metallic glinting in the shadows. She carefully pulled away more crumbling plaster until the opening was large enough to reach through. Her fingers closed on something cold and rectangular, a metal tin box about the size of a shoebox, its surface rusted but intact, sealed with a clasp that fought her for a moment before giving way. Inside were items undisturbed for decades, photographs showing the mansion in its glory days, pristine and beautiful, with well-dressed people standing on the porch, letters written in flowing handwriting on brittle paper, a deed made out to someone named Catherine Hartwell, dated 1926, and beneath everything else, a leather-bound journal filled with that same careful handwriting. Maggie and Noah sat on the floor as afternoon light faded, carefully examining the contents. The letters were correspondence between Catherine and various people, discussing mundane things, but also mentioning children's names and references to sleeping arrangements and meal schedules. The journal filled in the story. Catherine Hartwell had been a widow and school teacher who inherited this property from her parents in 1925. A year later, a massive storm flooded the coastal region, destroying the local orphanage housed in a church building on low ground. Catherine had opened her home to the surviving children, running what she called a refuge rather than an orphanage because she wanted them to feel they had a home, not an institution. She had used her own money to feed and clothe them, taught them herself in the front parlor, and fought with town officials who thought she was crazy. The journal entries span from 1926 through 1942, documenting daily life at the refuge and the children who passed through it, their triumphs and struggles, their arrivals frightened and their departures hopeful. The final item was an unsealed letter addressed to whoever finds this, written in a shakier version of Catherine's handwriting. If you find this, it means my time has passed and this house has fallen into neglect, which breaks my heart but doesn't surprise me. I have no family left to inherit, and I know the state will likely take the property for back taxes when I'm gone, but I'm hiding this record here in hope that someday, someone who needs this house as much as the children needed it will find their way here. If that person is you, I ask only one thing. Promise me that this house will protect someone again. It was built with love, sheltered dozens of souls in their darkest times, and it deserves to serve that purpose again. Don't let it become just another ruin on the coastline. Give it meaning. Give it life. Make it matter. With hope and faith, Catherine Hartwell. Maggie read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. This house, this broken disaster that she had bought in desperation, had once been a place of refuge, had saved lives, had mattered in a profound way. Catherine Hartwell had taken in children with nowhere else to go, exactly as this house had given Maggie and Noah a home when they had nowhere else to go. The parallel felt like fate. Have you ever received a message from the past that touched your heart? Pause the video and share your experience in the comments below. Noah, who had been reading over her shoulder, looked up at his mother and asked if they were going to keep the promise. Yes, Maggie whispered, we'll keep the promise. But even as she said it, the practical part of her mind noted they had 12 days left to come, up with $412 in back taxes or lose everything. That keeping promises required more than good intentions, that they were still hanging by the thinnest of threads. The next morning, Maggie was startled by a sharp knock at the front door. A balding man in a suit stood on the porch, clipboard in hand, introducing himself as James Harmon, building inspector for the town of Seabrook. Received reports of occupancy in a condemned structure, he said, eyeing Maggie's disheveled appearance with barely disguised disapproval. I need to conduct an inspection. For the next hour, Harmon moved through the house taking notes, clicking his tongue and pointing out dozens of code violations. The structural damage, the mold, the absence of functioning utilities, the unstable cliff face. This property is uninhabitable, he announced finally. You have 30 days to bring it up to code, or it will be declared a public hazard and you'll be forced to vacate. He handed her a formal notice, a long list of required repairs that might as well have been written in a foreign language given Maggie's inability to afford any of them. After he left, Eleanor arrived, bringing a basket with sandwiches, fruit, and cookies. When Maggie told her about the inspector's visit, Eleanor's face darkened. "James Harmon works for Edward Blackwood," she said. "Edward's on the town council and has been pushing to redevelop the entire coastline into luxury vacation homes. He's been trying to get his hands on this property for years. Catherine refused to sell to his father back in the day." Eleanor continued, lowering her voice although they were alone. "The Blackwoods have long memories and deep pockets. Be careful, dear." That evening, Maggie walked to the offices of the Seabrook Gazette. The weekly newspaper operated from a small space above the pharmacy. The editor, Frank Bennett, listened skeptically as she explained who she was and what she had found. But his expression changed when she showed him the photographs in Catherine's journal. He called in his photographer, asked questions for over an hour about how Maggie had ended up at the mansion and what she planned to do with it. The article ran in the next edition: "Forgotten Refuge Rediscovered, Local History Hidden in Walls." Frank had researched Catherine Hartwell and confirmed everything in the journal. She had been something of a local legend, a woman who had devoted her life to helping children when no one else would, running her refuge until her death in 1943. The article included photographs of the house in its prime and the children who had lived there, alongside a current photo of Maggie and Noah in front of the ruined mansion. The contrast between past and present stark and moving. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By the time Maggie walked home that afternoon, people were already waiting for her. Townspeople she had never met who had read the article and wanted to help. Robert Chen, a carpenter, offered to assess the structural damage for free. Patricia Adams from the local historical society was thrilled to learn about Catherine's refuge and promised to help apply for historical preservation grants. There were donations, cash handed to Maggie in envelopes or left in a jar that Linda set up at the grocery store, $5 here and 20 there from people who remembered their grandparents talking about Catherine, or who were just moved by the story of a single mother trying to honor a promise made by a stranger 8 decades ago. Over the next week, support grew in ways Maggie couldn't have imagined. Robert brought volunteers to patch the roof over the main living areas. Someone donated a generator so they could have electricity in the evening, and someone else donated a small space heater. The hardware store owner, who had turned Maggie away when she asked for a job, showed up with supplies he claimed were damaged or discontinued, perfectly good lumber, nails, and tools. High school students came after classes to help clear debris, treating it like a community service project. Patricia worked wonders with grant applications, and within 10 days she called Maggie with news that made her knees weak. The State Historical Preservation Board had approved an emergency grant of $15,000 for initial stabilization of the Catherine Hartwell Refuge, based on its historical significance. The money wouldn't cover a full restoration, but it would address the immediate structural repairs, foundation work, and roof replacement, enough to make the building safe and livable. And because the property now had historical designation, the back taxes had been forgiven as part of the preservation agreement. The $412 that had haunted Maggie's dreams, the deadline that had been counting down like a bomb, was gone. And she had $15,000 in grant money to actually make the house safe, to make it real. She put her face in her hands and sobbed from relief so intense it felt like pain. During renovations, as workers removed damaged floorboards in the entrance hall, Robert Chen discovered a second tin box hidden in a secret compartment beneath the staircase. This one contained detailed records of every child who had lived at the refuge, photographs, notes about their interests and dreams, letters some had sent to Catherine after moving on to jobs or adoptive homes. Eleanor Reed studied these documents with trembling hands and made a startling discovery. Her mother had been one of Catherine's children, a fact her family had never shared. "My mother was orphaned in the storm of '26, Eleanor said. pointing to a photograph of a solemn-faced girl labeled Mary, age 8. She rarely spoke about her childhood, but she always insisted we treat everyone with kindness because you never know what people have been through. As winter yielded to spring, the house transformed. The foundation was stabilized with concrete and rebar. The cliff edge was reinforced with retaining walls to hold back erosion. The roof was completely replaced with architectural shingles matching the historical style. The wraparound porch was rebuilt with pressure-treated lumber that could withstand salt air. But physical restoration was only part of what grew in Maggie's mind. As the house became livable, she thought about Catherine's request, about making the house matter again by having it protect someone. She and Noah didn't need all 19 rooms that the mansion contained, rooms that had once housed dozens of children, and there were others in situations like Maggie had been in just months ago. People living in their cars or couch surfing or stuck in situations where they were one paycheck away from homelessness. She proposed her idea at a town hall meeting in March, 6 months after she had first bought the property. Standing at the podium with photographs showing the house's transformation, she explained her vision for the Catherine Hartwell Refuge, a transitional shelter that would house up to 3 families at a time, providing them with a safe place while they found jobs, saved money, and worked toward permanent housing. It wouldn't be charity exactly, she explained. Residents would contribute what they could toward utilities and food, and would help with maintenance, creating a community rather than a handout. She had researched the legal requirements for such a facility and found social workers willing to donate time to help residents with job searches and life skills. The town council, minus Edward Blackwood, who had mysteriously missed the meeting, approved the proposal unanimously, moved by Maggie's presentation and the transformation she had already accomplished. Patricia helped with the nonprofit paperwork, establishing the Catherine Hartwell Foundation with Maggie as director and a board of community members who believed in the mission. A furniture drive brought beds, dressers, and kitchen equipment from people donating items they no longer needed. By May, 7 months after that cold auction morning, the Catherine Hartwell Refuge officially opened as a transitional shelter for families in crisis. The first residents were a young couple with an infant who had been living in a motel after a house fire, and a single father with 2 daughters who had lost his job and apartment in the same week. They moved into bedrooms that Maggie and volunteers had prepared, rooms with fresh paint and comfortable beds, and windows overlooking the ocean. Maggie and Noah took the ground floor apartment, the old servants' quarters converted into a comfortable 3-room space. The refuge operated on a careful balance of structure and compassion. Residents paid a small amount weekly if able, contributing to a common fund for utilities and groceries, but those who had nothing were not turned away. Everyone helped with cooking, cleaning, and maintaining the property, creating shared responsibility rather than dependency. Michael Torres, a part-time social worker, worked with each family to create goals and action plans, connecting them with job resources and whatever services they needed to transition back to independence. The average stay was 3 to 4 months, enough time for people to stabilize without becoming too reliant on the shelter. 1 year after the auction where she had bid $400 on a property everyone thought worthless, Maggie stood on the rebuilt wraparound porch, watching the sun set over the ocean. Noah, now 8, sat on the steps eating ice cream from the shop in town that knew them by name. Rusty dozed at his feet, the old dog perfectly adapted to life in the big house. The mansion glowed golden in the evening light, solid and beautiful and purposeful, every window showing signs of life within. Maggie thought about the journey that had brought them here, from sleeping in their car to creating something that mattered to an entire community, and felt profound gratitude mixed with determination to continue what Catherine had started. The Catherine Hartwell Refuge would operate for years, helping hundreds of families transition from crisis to stability. But the real legacy was simpler than that, more fundamental. It was in the promise kept, in the house saved from ruin and given new purpose, in the proof that sometimes the most desperate gambles change everything, Not just for one person, but for everyone whose life intersects with that decision. Catherine Hartwell had built something that mattered. Maggie Williams had rebuilt it. And together across 80 years, they had created a refuge that would stand against ocean winds and protect people who needed protection, exactly as it was meant to. Sometimes the most daring leaps take us exactly where we need to be. Have you ever risked everything for a dream? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspirational stories like this one. The house had found its purpose again, and in doing so, had helped Maggie find hers, transforming a transaction born of desperation into a legacy that would outlive them both.